Doug, where do things stand in terms of mediation?
Well, Annette, for proof of just how futile and powerless mediation has been so far in this conflict, all you need to do is look at the facts on the ground, as you just reported. In Gaza, the Israeli attacks on Gaza have been the heaviest of this 7-day campaign so far in the past 24 hours, heavy amid that UN security session meeting. It was the third emergency session in a week, the first public one, and the same outcome, which is essentially no outcome, no joint statement from the members, and no joint appeal for a so-called cessation of hostilities. Rather, like I said, you have had a very heavy, a longer, a more sustained, a broader bombardment by the Israelis, and continued rocket attacks from Hamas over the past 24 hours, continuing right up into this morning in the case of the Israeli attacks along the Gaza coastal strip. Look, what are we seeing here? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see it. The U.S. has basically been playing the role on the Security Council throughout this crisis that it often accuses others, such as Russia and China, of playing in other conflicts, whether it be with Syria or the recent coup in Myanmar. It is the blocker. That is the U.S., and this is a traditional pillar of U.S. foreign policy, staunchly and resolutely has Israel's back. And that position from the U.S., which has been unbending so far, basically reiterating the often repeated mantra that, quote, Israel has the right to self-defense, to protect itself. Because of that, you have an inability to issue any sort of joint statement or any sort of communique. What you were left with was a lot of mutual recrimination and back and forth blaming from the Palestinian foreign minister and the Israeli delegate. And meanwhile, other members, Annette, basically saying that Israel is its actions violate international laws and occupying power, and it has been using disproportionate and deadly force. But the U.S. has, like I said, had Israel's back, so nothing out of the UN Security Council so far.
Yet US President Joe Biden is facing growing pressure from progressive Democrats who want him to take a tougher stance over Israel's treatment of Palestinians, Doug.
Absolutely. Listen, Joe Biden was in the Senate for decades. He's been sort of the traditional pillar of U.S. foreign policy on this issue, at least reflecting the stance, which I just said, that Israel has a right to self-defense, Israel being, one of the closest U.S. allies, and he has not moved from that position. He once called himself Israel's best Catholic friend, and he also condoned an Israeli attack in 1981 on a suspected nuclear reactor. So here's the thing. Right now, you have progressive Democrats in the Congress, such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known as AOC, asking if the U.S. cannot stand up to an ally on this issue, who can it stand up to? What claim of credibility does it have in other matters of human rights? You have, and she asks, yes, the U.S. can reiterate that Israel has a right to self-defense. No one will question that. But she asks, do the Palestinian people have a right to survive? Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, the independent from Vermont who ran as a Democratic candidate for president in the primaries, at least, he wrote a very hard-hitting editorial in the New York Times in saying the U.S. must stop being, as he put it, an apologist for the Netanyahu government. It needs to be more categorical in its condemnation, and it needs to show a new foreign policy to reflect changing times. Joe Biden has shown a commitment to racial justice and human rights at home on the domestic front, embracing the Black Lives Matter movement. But in the view of many of these lawmakers, the Democrats, Annette, it's not shifting with the times on foreign policy. It's not talking the talk on racial justice and human rights when it comes to its policy, especially with regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Doug Herbert, thank you.